Okay. So the publication we created towards network learning, stronger together, an introduction to our community's pedagogies of practice. Ko taranaki te maunga, ko pātea te awa, ko whakaaharangi te kāinga, ko rangatani te waka, ko Roberts te iwi, ko Rachel Wally ahau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, katoa. Rangatani te waka is the New Zealand Shipping Lines, 1961, when my parents came over to New Zealand. I come from Taranaki, though I live in the Eastern Bay. This is where I used to live when I made this presentation. Now we live further a bit inland. I've been leading the VLN primary since it started in 2009, and I was principal of Taranaki, which was a Taranaki secondary schools, ICT PD facilitator for Central Taranaki schools, classroom teacher in Opanaki High School and Stratford in primary and secondary schools. So learning with technologies has always been a really important part of my career time from the very first time I trained as in the fully online Bachelor of Teaching degree in 1999. We did it completely online. I was in Stratford. It was a Massey-based program. Without this opportunity, I would not have been able to access education, and that's why now it's really important for me that I can extend this opportunity for our kids and their learning. So that's a little bit about me. The purpose of this one is to introduce you to the model, and look, you walk, talk, eat, breathe the model, and I'd be really interested to have feedback after this about what perhaps is not represented and what I have to share, and what we could be sharing more around the model of what's happening in the VLN, or perhaps how the model needs to change, because I think we'll only move forward if we keep changing. So there's a lot, I'm not going into so much detail on the session, it's just an overview, but if you haven't had the opportunity yet, I really encourage you to have a look at this report, and I'll link it into the Hui Hub. There's also a 10-page version, I think, thanks Lucy, I think condensed it for us to make it a bit of a shorter, easier read. So I encourage you to have a read through and bring up questions for our conversations later. So I talked about the effects of COVID really highlighted the need for our flexible and online approaches. And that's a major factor in the VLN being engaged by the Ministry to write this report. It was meant to be an internal report for them, but we thought it would be really useful to be able to share with those who are engaged in this practice and those who could potentially be engaged in this practice. The Tomorrow's Schools review was a contributing factor in recognising that strategic role of the VLN community in education, and there's actually a picture of us all the VLN leaders here. This is when you first started, Lucy, I think. So you might have seen Ken, who dropped in earlier today, is originally Otago Net and now NetNZ. There's my husband Rick at the back, who's been leading VLN Primary since before it began, before I started working on it. Darren at the back, who works with Ken. Amanda, who has taken over from Carolyn as FARNet principal, and now with the OLC with Sarah, and Sue also with OLC. I must have been taking the picture. It's my seat. That was at Core Education last year when we were engaging with the Tomorrow's School Review Committee. Segregation of the sexes, yeah. Boys at the back. Girls, it's because the girls are doing all the work at the front. Yeah. Yeah. So the VLN community is there's basically 3 organisations, soon to be 2. So the primaries work mainly with the primary age children. OLC, which is a collaboration of a number of North Island clusters, and NetNZ, who tend to mainly work in the South Island. At the moment, we've been going through a merger with the secondaries. OLC has decided to come on board. NetNZ are continuing to be NetNZ. So the new organisation and we'll probably talk about that later, will be kicking off next year. So it's nothing new. The charter that we've had in the primary school hasn't changed in all the years we've been doing it, because there's still a lot of change to happen in schools. The work that we're doing has still got a lot of significance and a lot of uptake to happen. So we celebrated 25 years of online learning in New Zealand in 2019, and that we marked with a little hui down in Christchurch. So there's a picture of primary kids to secondary kids all the way through. And it was quite interesting having a farewell with Carolyn to see what the changes have been over time. So in the very beginning, it was really before there was proper internet that we know. I worked through the telephone, through an audiographic stylus and a computer. There was a learning languages pilot, and I do know because Upanaki High School was part of it, and I found their styluses and tablets that day, and one of the teachers there was teaching Spanish. So it says Canterbury in the correspondence school, but I extended a bit further than that. And then in the early 2000s, loads of secondary schools got involved. There was net everything all over the country. And then, there's a lot of work happening with the Kura Kaupapa Māori. So actually they were the pioneers in 2000, in the early 2000s, who connected Wharekura East Coast area schools and Māori boarding schools. And that was called the CORM network. ICTPD funding helped everything move along. So we had in almost every region, there were VLNs popping up all over the country. But over that period of time, it was really hard to become sustainable and affordable, and we started to merge. So there's a little bit of a history around it. There's a bit of a history around the technology. Sitting on the computer is actually a telephone. When we started out in the early days of primary school, the internet was so bad. We thought, well, actually, maybe we should just wait for a few years. But these kids were keen as beans. The teachers were keen to continue, and so we carried on through very, very difficult technical challenges. We carried on and used things like Adobe Connect. Does anybody in the room remember using Adobe Connect? Yeah, so I guess the thing about Adobe Connect was you could set up all your space beforehand. You put these things in the Adobe Connect room and it was all there ready for you to go, your quizzes, your links, things you could bring up and make bigger. Whereas now that's all we just do it all from the desktop. It's all in our computer and we bring it forward. So, so we went from Adobe Connect into Zoom. So the primary network continues to grow. NFRL, although we complain about it, wow, it's so much better than 10 years ago. There are still bandwidth barriers for schools, but it is getting better. I've seen the difference over many years. Kids have access to devices. Many of them know how to use them. And our younger learners are a third of the whole VLN akonga. So it's great to see those younger kids learning online. And we found through the impact of COVID, kids who didn't have access at home, we just didn't see them, they disappeared. And I'm sure you probably had that experience too with groups of kids you no longer saw. It's probably because they just didn't have that connectivity at home. So the digital divide is alive, unfortunately, for many of our learners. What we did notice through COVID is that when our students came back or we had new schools learning online with us, we didn't need to spend quite so much support and setup time because they were already quite familiar with the tools and how to use them. So in those days of all these different clusters coming on board all around the country, the key drivers were, the small rural schools. A third of our secondary schools had less than 120 students in year 11 plus. That's quite a lot of schools. Almost all secondary schools had kids who were learning with Te Kura. And they saw that opportunity that, hey, actually, if we work together, we could provide these opportunities ourselves for these kids. And so that's when that innovation and collaboration really started to kick in, and the schools themselves formed clusters and created new opportunities for these students. And there's stuff being written back in '97 about how whole communities have been turned around, and the good example of that is Oxford Area School, where the whole community was starting to decline because kids were going on the bus to go into town, or the bigger town, I guess Christchurch, and young people were just flying out of the town. When they got going with their VLN programs, students in Oxford Area School had more choices than kids in Wellington City College, and they began to stay in town, and things began to revive again for that community. It was a direct benefit through their opportunities to access a wide-ranging education. So there are more curriculum choices, access to experts, collaborative projects that they could get engaged in, and learning that's really high interest and relevant to them. This is what's happening now, thanks to all you people in the room and out there and online. So sharing our resources, provision of professional learning, retention, it enabled us to retain specialist staff and enabled us to retain our students. Some of our schools have said our kids no longer leave us at year 7 and go to the intermediate or go to town, because they can access all these special interest and extension programs through VLN. So it's great to be able to offer those benefits for our learners. But we know there's challenges, technology being one of them. Learning support is really important. We've talked about the digital divide, time for our kids. And Carolyn said in her work, te wā is the most important thing. Having that time and giving that time so that students have the ability to independently get on and do the work that they need to do. Being separated in space and time from our students, and that's the sort of stuff you see talked about today, that not only do you have to think about the space that you're in, but the distance between you. You're not that immediately accessible to your learners, and so there's always a bit of a lag of between the feedback that kids are wanting. I know that Linda and Carolyn were talking about this the other day about kids who just ring up and want you to check their work now, and you're not even at work. Challenges of timetables across schools. And Olivia will probably know this as well too. Kids who end up having classes during a break is really, really challenging to motivate them to be attending regularly, or to be able to remember even to get to them, finding places to study and being able to communicate. So those are challenges we keep having to work through all the time. So in the publication we put together, we talked about values really underpinning what we did, and we worked up a set of values that we thought were important to the VLN community, and why we were successful. And there's our values there. That collective contribution, engagement and support, about how we work together. And just some of the oldies around the table remember this one as well. Actually, I meant to say, Carolyn, and the thing to you, thank you for collaborating as we got the Learning of Community online handbook together. So I see the publication I'm sharing with you now as the next version of the Learning Online's handbooks. And this Learning Online Community's online handbook was actually the second version of one my mum did. with Howard Baldwin and other people like that. So we have documented this over the years, and it is a useful resource to refer to, but it's always changing and worthwhile, and continue to keep it as a working document. So back then with the Learning of communities online, we looked at 4 Ps. That participation was really important. If you didn't have kids participating or schools participating, well, you didn't really have a thing happening. Participation underpinned everything. And that participation covered things like our programs of learning, all the different courses, projects, programs that were going, things like projects, like we've got a rural project going on at the moment, and I know there's different projects that are going on across our schools that are happening online and that are happening through the VLN, and of course professional learning, of which we're engaged in now. And it's really interesting being involved in the network of expertise because they're all in this space now. Lucy and I presented a workshop to all the other subject association and networks of expertise on how to run effective online PLD in Zoom environments, and they are all coming into this space. So no longer is it just something that we might do. Everybody's in this space now, or starting to be, and the expectation is there. So in the Pedagogies of Practice, we broke down the teaching and learning into emergent design. And again, it was interesting to see Lucia's work there because the emergent design sits right in the middle of it. Community and connectedness and learner-centeredness. Our learner's always at the centre. So here's a little graphic put together about what's involved in emergent design. All the pieces. I think Jules said the other day, it's like making a cake. If you put all the ingredients in there, you might tweak it a little bit here and there, and voila, you have a recipe for teaching and learning online. And it's not cookie cutter stuff, you know, because it's all based around what our kids need and also what's happening for them, you know, where the learning is happening for them. But these are a lot of key ingredients that you will probably have to mix and match. And one of the things when I first taught was that you need several plans. You've got the plan that you intend to have, and then there's your plan B and C, and prepare for the unexpected. Perhaps in those days, a lot of it was perhaps around the unreliable technology and other ways of reaching out to our learners. So we know that careful planning is still important. Emergent design is the method of designing for the unexpected, assuming it's impossible to anticipate how students will use the tools or tackle the learning activities. So it's recognised that you have a clear course structure in place, but that it's broad enough to be flexible and adaptive. It's learner-centred, so it involves this iterative process or cycle. And Jen was talking earlier about involving her students in the co-design, getting that feedback as you're going along, and then adapting your program from there. So yes, you need to have some structure. Yes, you need to have those clear outcomes, but as you're working, that's emerging with your learners at the same time. If you break it down with a modular approach, then you can easily make changes. But if things are really incremental from beginning to end, then you're probably going to run into some challenges. And that collaborative approach with learning with your ākonga, working together to build that knowledge and generate content. So you do need to plan and design, and doing it with your learners is a great way to do it as well. So as well as asynchronous environments, we need to think about how the asynchronous environments work together. So that's a whole pedagogical model of the time. And I think this is the difference with the VLN community, is that it does have a synchronous model. If you look at virtual schools in the States, that's a rarity that they get their kids together like we do in the Zoom classrooms. Almost everything is set programs and courses that they run through independently and don't do together as a class. And I think we're very different in our approach. So the community and the connectedness, that's I guess an important thing that makes our learners feel like they belong and gets them to engage. So there's a few underlying pedagogies around that, like social presence. We were talking the other day about, you know, kids need to see us as real people, not just some avatars coming into the classroom. They're real people that they can identify with and with others in the online environment. So face-to-face is meant to have the most social presence, going to written text-based the least. So having this sense of presence with your learners, building those positive relationships so that our kids can speak, share their ideas, engage without feeling that they're being judged. And I think that just down to good teaching happens face-to-face. It also happens online. So it's that people factor. It was interesting to hear about AI and all the wonderful resources that Steve shared with us yesterday, but that human factor of connecting with our learners is the single biggest important thing, and also enabling them to connect with each other. And that's a big thing that our kids, and particularly those who are in the more remote areas, if they don't have children their own age, or if the other child their own age happens to be a sibling, that's not much fun. They love coming into online classes and making new friends. Yeah. So the teacher really needs to be present in the asynchronous space as well, when they are using their Google Classroom or communicating with email, or just being available for students when they're in touch with them. Yeah, so the strong learner-centered focus is happening in the feeling community. That dynamics of the online environment where the teacher is not physically present really naturally lends itself to this. Being able to provide a range of ways for learners to exercise agency. And I think that kids have a lot more agency and independence in the online classes than they do in their face-to-face classes, because they don't have the classroom teacher breathing down their neck all the time. They have a lot of independence. And many of my senior students used to love that opportunity to organise their own time and to have that flexibility around what they were doing in their lives, around their learning. The flip side of that too is that not all kids come with that capability, and they need to be supported to develop those competencies. So that's where we get into the other important part of our pedagogies of practice, is this need for robust learning support. And one of the things I've been concerned about for many years is that schools will only save online learning for the best and the brightest. Yet if online learning is about equity, it should be there for everybody. But if everybody is able to access online learning, then our kids need some support. And it depends on their age. I've seen year ones participate in a more inclusive way than I have seen year eights participate. Needing very little support, they jump in there and they get involved. They are the loudest children in the room. And then you see some year eights who are a little bit shy and a little less forthcoming. So it doesn't matter how old they are, it all depends on their needs, their dispositions, their literacy levels, and their confidence. And we need to scaffold that sort of support for them so that they can become confident. So one of the things that we think is really important, that every school has a dedicated support person to ensure that those children are well supported. Oh, is she? Okay, come thing and tell us.
I just want to acknowledge Anne Williams there in the photo. She is the E-Dean at the librarian and E-Dean at Ashburton College, and she's been one of our leading E-Deans in NetNZ. And that was Carolyn. She was actually in that photo with Carolyn, and she's actually retiring to look after her grandchildren this year. But we've had lots of fun times with Anne. She's been great. She's on our NetNZ board too, so we're not going to lose it completely. But another key person if you want to know about E-Deaning. Anne's a fantastic resource.
I was going to hand it to you. Okay, learning support structures. This is not my work. This is Ricky Wally's work from his masters in 2016. He looked at learning support in schools and what was most important to provide effective learning support. And those are some key factors there. One of the things that we rely on, but we think is really important for us is a tuakana taina culture, where students learn from each other and support each other. And over time, particularly in the primary schools, becomes a culture of learning in schools. So the older students have got it down pat, and they support the younger students who are coming in. And then there's this growing expectation as you come through the school that that'll be you engaged in your choice of feeling class, and you will become the tuakana, and you'll have other taina that you are looking after. So that happens within the school, and it also happens within the classroom setting. So that's having learners taking responsibility not only for themselves, but for each other as well. So it really is a whole learning community. So developing the learner, this is more about how the learner can develop rather than the structural supports that we might provide. So there's various dispositions and competencies that are important for their success. Being open-minded about learning, having effective communication skills, self-motivation and discipline, and hard-working critical thinking, all the things that magic fairy dust you want to spray around the kids and wish they were all like that. And we know some kids are up there and some kids are still learning. And really it comes down to the key competencies: thinking, relating to others, managing self, participating and contributing. And you know, that's an ideal for all learners, but they're all on that pathway as we are as well. So that, you know, that's competencies for learning online varies depending on the kids, but the environment that we're in really amplifies, you know, if that's happening well or what needs to happen there. So we wouldn't expect that everyone has mastered these competencies before they engage in online learning, or we'd never have any online learners. By engaging in online learners, they grow in these competencies. And this is another thing that came back to me from many of our schools, is that often they didn't come in for the curriculum, you know, they could choose this or that, but they really came in for their children to develop their key competencies, to develop their digital fluencies. And the curriculum they learned along the way was a bit of a byproduct of this. So this can happen naturally for online learning, but we also need to be very cognizant of it and plan and support ways of developing that in our learners. Assessment for learning, and this came up quite a bit in the last couple of years around the NCA requirements. Who wants to speak on that, the NCA requirements for assessment? Alternative assessment, did you just want to speak to that?
Yes, so over the first lockdown, NZQA developed a whole lot of templates that we can access from. In fact, anyone can access because it's on the free part of NZQA. And so we could use other evidence, not just the, you know, the Google Doc or the essay or whatever they'd written. We could use conversations, we could use other evidence, but as teachers, we just had to document that. So there's docs there that we can actually pull down and edit now. They've made them all editable, and we can actually fill those in as teachers. I haven't used them extensively. We're not meant to use them in as marking schedules, but I've found them really good as actually making sure as you work through that with the students. And I have this year, I had some students who are sort of quite sick over one assessment. I did go back and do oral reassessments with them because they hadn't made the grade. They're allowed a resubmission, and rather than them trying to rewrite all the bits and that, I just had a conversation with them. So I recorded that conversation. So there's my evidence if NZQA want to see it. But I could also fill in the template just to show that they had, you know, answered that question or that had met that criteria. So they're all there, but if secondary teachers don't know about them, just look under, they're called all evidence templates. Help me out, secondaries. I think it's all evidence template. Is that what's called on each subject? If you go into your subject page on NZQA, and you'll see, I think it's bright yellow. Usually it was highlighted in bright yellow. You can find them there, and you just put your standard number in and find the template there. And as I say, they're quite good too. I did say we weren't meant to use this marking. Yeah, well, actually, I just told everyone I sort of use it because they were such a good tick. They were like a tick box that we could then make sure they'd covered everything in the assessment. Sorry.
Yeah, I asked for a bit of an elaboration on that because it really is about different ways of assessing for learning. And in the online environment, we're actually really well placed to do things differently, and yeah, and to be really visible, and being able to track what's happening, and to include the learners in that process. So you know, as technology becomes sophisticated, that we can engage in many ways: written, visual, video, audio, and you know, is endless and easily shared. So building teacher capabilities, and we know that's important. There's so many teachers that have worked through over the years who've said that teaching online has just been a huge growth curve for them. I have one teacher, now she's only just retired. She was one of our long-standing teachers. After 5 years, she goes, I get it. You have to do things differently. You cannot take what you do in your classroom and put it in front of the camera. You know, working with a new e-teacher once, say like, oh, and I'll just keep talking until the camera goes black. Thinking, we've got a lot to learn. So lots of the elements about teaching and learning are the same: relationships, curriculum, but everything is different as well. And until you get into that space, you don't quite realize. So it's really challenging. There's a lot to learn. And I think we provide a lot of support for our e-teachers coming through in the community that we support them through, and with our PLD opportunities we provide for them. But it does take a special sort of teacher who's a little bit more resilient, has a positive attitude when they're faced with challenges. They need to be reflective and inquire into what works, and they really do need to be prepared to change and to try different things, to be comfortable learning alongside their children, and that's all part of building teacher capability. And one of the things that I thought around teaching in general was that any teacher should be able to teach online or face-to-face, because they knew how digital technologies could support them and their learners. And I think COVID was a bit of a baptism of fire in that regard. And it was a little bit challenging to think that so many teachers so quickly went back to business as usual when they got back to school. So I think the VLN community will always evolve. You'll hear lots of talk about hybrid learning. I wonder how long for, but at the moment it's hybrid learning. It might be called something else later on. I always used to call it blended learning. Doesn't matter what you call it, it's where it happens here, face-to-face, where it happens online. And one of my big takeouts from today is Lucia saying it's not about online learning. The learning is where the learner is. And whatever's wrapped around that learner is going to be different for every one of them. So this, one of the definitions that we liked and talked about in the Pedagogies of Practice book was looking ahead to network learning. So you think about the schooling system, we're all parts of the network. At the moment, we're very siloed, and thanks to Tomorrow's Schools, which still exists, we're very siloed sometimes within our schools and across our networks. You could see us as one education system that was networked. And that's sort of part of where we might be going with VLN. So if you look at network rather than online or virtual as a next stage in pedagogical development, network learning focuses on interpersonal relationships, collaborative engagement and valued activity with technology and the interconnections. distinguishes itself from some online educational developments that undermine human connectivity, and that's the AI I was talking about before. Not saying don't have AI, I think it's awesome, brilliant. But if any teacher is worried about being replaced, they probably should be replaced. That's quoting someone, but I can't remember who it was. Don't worry about it. You know, our teacher's role is always important.
Michael Fullen who said that.
Was it?
I'm pretty sure it was.
Yeah, Michael Fullen
Yeah,
apparently.
I remember it, so-
Yes, those things are. Well, Maslow's hierarchy of needs will always come first, and those are the things that need our attention first. Okay. So we recognise that the Veeling community will continue to evolve and change to meet the needs of our education system. We wouldn't exist if schools didn't ask for things, if schools didn't have the need. So we continue to change to meet their needs. So we need to consider what limits we may have placed on ourselves and what the possibilities are. So the report that we put is a snapshot of when we wrote it. But I think there's loads of things we could be thinking about was what's down the track, what's really good to keep, what could we be changing, what are the future possibilities. And one of the things that underpins all the work we do is providing equity of access to learners for wherever they are. We're just a mechanism for doing that. And there's just a few links to some things from the handbook or some other supporting links. If you care to read, there's a lot of reading there. I wouldn't recommend it for holiday reading, but dip into it. Yeah, I think I've come to the end.